The ISS Pioneer was no ordinary vessel. It was humanity's greatest achievement, an amalgamation of bleeding-edge technology and centuries of spacefaring knowledge. It was built for the unknown, designed to endure the vast, uncaring abyss beyond the galaxy's rim. And now it faced its greatest challenge, the silent horizon. Captain Elias Voss stood at the bridge, his gaze fixed on the looming darkness ahead. The galactic plain stretched behind them, a sea of light fading into the abyss. Before them, the silent horizon was an expanse of pure nothingness, darker than the void of normal space. No stars, no cosmic dust, no radio signals, just an absence that devoured everything. "Final system check," Voss commanded, his voice calm, controlled. "Aye, sir," responded Lieutenant Area Monroe, the ship's comms officer. "All systems green. Last transmission from Sol Command received, and acknowledge." She hesitated before adding, "They say we're on our own now." "We always were," murmured Chief Engineer Kovacs from his station. Voss turned to his crew. They were the best of the best, hand-picked for this mission. Monroe, the expert in deep space communications. Kovacs, a legend in engineering circles. Dr. Isaac Riza, the ship's lead scientist, who had studied the silent horizon for years. And Commander Celine Ward, his second-in-command, an unshakable force of discipline and instinct. "The moment we cross that threshold," Ward reminded the crew, "there's no turning back. If anyone has doubts, speak now." Silence. No one wavered. They had all read the reports. Every probe, every manned mission sent past this point had simply ceased to exist. No wreckage, no distress calls, no sign they had ever been there at all. Theories ranged from black holes to alien interference, but no evidence had ever surfaced. Only one thing was certain: nothing returned. Voss exhaled slowly. "All right. Helm, take us in." The Pioneer inched forward, thrusters burning softly as they crossed the invisible boundary. The moment they entered, a sensation rippled through the ship, not turbulence, not an impact, but something deeper, something that pressed against their very existence. Monroe gasped, "Captain, we just lost all external signals." Voss frowned. "That was expected." "No, sir. I mean all of them." She tapped frantically at her console. "Quantum entanglement link. Dead. Deep space relay. Gone. Even." She hesitated, eyes wide. "Even local transmissions. The ship's own internal signals are lagging." Voss's hands tightened on the command rail. "What about the eye?" A distorted voice crackled over the speakers. It was HFY, the ship's onboard intelligence. "I am experiencing." The eye's voice fractured, words scattering into static before cutting off entirely. The lights flickered. Then the whispering began. Not over the comms, not through any detectable means. It was inside their heads, soft, unintelligible, yet undeniable. And for the first time in his career, Captain Elias Voss felt fear. The whispering slithered through their minds, a presence without sound, without form. It wasn't words, not exactly, but impressions, disjointed, flickering thoughts that didn't belong to them. A sense of being watched, a sensation of something just beyond perception, waiting. Captain Voss forced himself to steady his breathing. The Pioneer was a fortress of technology, armed with shielding, countermeasures, and enough computational power to map entire star systems in seconds. Yet none of that mattered here. The silent horizon wasn't a battlefield. It was something else. "Report," Voss ordered, keeping his voice firm. Monroe's fingers danced across the controls, her expression tight. "I got nothing. Every wavelength is empty. Even standard radio bounce-backs aren't returning. It's like..." She hesitated, voice dropping. "It's like signals don't exist here." Commander Ward turned from her station, her jaw set. "Captain, I don't like this. If this place can block our communications, what else can it affect?" Before Voss could respond, Dr. Reza spoke up from the science station. I don't think it's just blocking them. He gestured to his screen. It's erasing them. Silence fell over the bridge. Explain, Voss said. Reza exhaled, bringing up a holographic model. I've been monitoring our onboard data logs. Something is altering them in real time. Not deleting. Not in the way a system wipe works. It's like the data was never recorded in the first place. Like our logs don't even remember trying to capture anything. Kovacs cursed under his breath. That's not possible. Neither is losing a quantum-entangled connection, Monroe muttered. Then the whispering intensified. It wasn't just an ambient presence anymore. It was directed, focused. Voss felt something brush against his thoughts, searching, probing. He clenched his fists, resisting the irrational urge to shout, to do something. And then it spoke. Not through the comms. Not through any device. Inside their minds. You do not belong here. The words were distant yet intimate, hollow yet suffocating. The voice had no tone, no pitch, no accent. It was nothingness given form, a paradox of sound that shouldn't exist. The bridge crew stiffened. Kovacs dropped his tablet. Monroe pressed her hands against her temples, her breathing ragged. Reza looked pale. Did everyone hear that? Voss forced himself to stay composed. He turned to Ward. Check the crew. I want to know if anyone else heard it. Ward nodded, pressing the intercom. All decks, report in. Static. Then, you do not belong here. Every screen on the bridge flickered. The words appeared, scrawled in jagged, unnatural text. Text that hadn't been typed by human hands. Ward paled. Captain. That didn't come from the ship. Voss's stomach tightened. Something out there wasn't just watching. It knew they were here. And it wanted them gone. The unnatural text on the screens flickered and distorted before vanishing entirely, as if it had never been there at all. For a moment, the bridge was silent except for the uneven breaths of the crew. Then Monroe swore under her breath. Captain, this isn't right. This can't be right. Voss turned to her. What do you mean? She gestured frantically at her console. The logs. Our recordings of the last 5 minutes. Gone. No, worse than gone. There's no missing data. It's like those minutes never even happened. Reza's voice was strained. It's not just the logs. Check your personal devices. Any notes, anything written. They're blank. Kovacs grabbed his tablet, scrolling through his engineering reports. His eyes widened. No. This isn't possible. He lifted the screen, his hands shaking. This was my maintenance log. I wrote in it this morning. Now, nothing. Not erased. Just never written. Voss's pulse quickened. Whatever was happening wasn't just interference. It was reality itself being rewritten. Commander Ward, he said tightly, get a full head count. I want. A screen rang out from Deck 3. The bridge crew snapped to attention. Monroe, get internal visuals. Voss barked. Monroe's hands flew across the console, but her face paled. Sir, we don't have a Deck 3. For a moment, the words didn't make sense. What? Ward demanded. Monroe swallowed. The ship's schematics. Deck 3 isn't there anymore. It's like we never had one. That wasn't possible. The Pioneer had 6 decks. Voss grabbed the intercom. All crew, report in. Anyone on Deck 3? He stopped. No one was on Deck 3. Because Deck 3 didn't exist. A cold dread settled in the captain's gut. He turned to Ward, whose face was rigid with realization. How many crew do we have? He asked, his voice measured. Ward checked the ship's roster. She hesitated. Then her hand went to her sidearm. 35, she said. Voss's stomach dropped. They had launched with 40. Monroe let out a strangled noise. No, that's wrong. We had. Her voice broke as if the knowledge was being pulled from her mind even as she spoke. But Voss knew with absolute certainty that 5 people who had once stood among them were now gone. Not dead, not missing, never there. The walls of the ship felt tighter, colder. The silent horizon wasn't just empty. It was erasing them, piece by piece. And the worst part, Voss could no longer remember their names. He gritted his teeth. No, humanity would not be erased. He turned to the crew, his voice firm. We fight this. Every second, every breath, every action. We make sure we exist. The darkness did not answer. But it didn't need to. It had already begun. The bridge was suffocatingly silent. Not the kind of silence that came from muted sound, but a deeper, more insidious absence, the kind that made Voss's skin crawl. 5 people were gone. Not dead. Not missing. Erased. And worst of all, no one could remember them. Voss clenched his fists. Everyone listen up. We are under attack. This thing isn't a force of nature. It's a predator. He met each of his officers' eyes. And we are its prey. Ward, still gripping her sidearm, exhaled sharply. Then how do we fight something that erases people like they never existed? Voss turned to Riza. Doctor. Riza was already working, his fingers flying over the console as he cross-checked what little data they still had. It's targeting information, concepts, not physical matter. The ship is still intact. The logs aren't deleted, they're rewritten as if nothing was ever recorded. Monroe swallowed. So we're not just disappearing. We're being undone. Kovacs ran a shaky hand through his hair. That explains the ship's systems breaking down. If it erases something like an engineer, then the work they did never happened. His voice dropped. If it erases the captain, Voss didn't let the thought take root. Then we make ourselves impossible to erase. We anchor our existence in as many ways as we can. He turned to Monroe. How much data do we have on the crew? Even personal notes, photos, messages, anything. Monroe's hands trembled as she pulled up the files. I don't know. I can't tell if we've lost some already. Riza's expression darkened. Then we need something it can't erase. Ward narrowed her eyes. What do you mean? Riza stood. If this thing works by erasing information, we counter it by embedding ourselves so deeply into reality that it can't remove us without breaking something fundamental. Kovacs nodded in understanding. Hard-coded redundancies. Voss seized on the idea. We start recording everything. Multiple copies, multiple formats. We carve names into the hull, write them on our skin if we have to. Make physical imprints. The crew nodded, grasping the urgency. Monroe grabbed a stylus and scrawled her own name across her arm. Riza followed, marking his on his wrist. But then something shifted. The ship groaned, a sound deeper than metal stress, more like the bending of reality itself. And then they felt it. A pressure, a weightless force pressing against their thoughts, as if something was trying to slip inside. Voss's vision blurred for a moment. A thought, alien and vast, whispered against his consciousness. You do not belong. He gritted his teeth. Damn you, he muttered. We will exist. The entity did not speak again, but the darkness pressed closer. And somewhere in the ship, a 6th person vanished. The Pioneer shuddered as if something massive had brushed against its hull, though the sensors still detected nothing. Voss's heart pounded. It was getting worse. Ward scanned the bridge, her grip tightening on her sidearm. Who was it? She demanded. No one answered. A hollow silence filled the room as the realization sank in. They didn't know. The crew count was down to 34, but their memories held no gaps, no absence, no mourning. Whoever had vanished had been seamlessly erased, not just from existence, but from the concept of having ever existed. Voss turned to Riza. This thing is accelerating. How do we slow it down? Riza's hands flew across his console. We need anchors, something that resists being erased. We were on the right track carving our names, but that's not enough. It's adapting. Monroe, still gripping the stylus she'd used to write on her arm, paled. Captain. She turned her arm toward them. The ink was gone. She gasped, eyes wide. I wrote my name. I know I did. Voss felt an ice-cold rage settle in his chest. This entity wasn't just erasing, it was actively undoing any attempt to remember. Kovacs slammed a fist against his console. We need something it can't erase, something more permanent than memory or digital records. Ward's eyes sharpened. Biological markers. The human brain is wired for recognition. If we implant self-replicating information in our minds, it might resist erasure. Riza snapped his fingers. A thought virus. Monroe blinked. A what? A self-reinforcing concept, Riza explained quickly. A cognitive structure so deeply embedded that it spreads, replicates, and resists deletion because it's tied to instinct and survival. Voss narrowed his eyes. How do we create one? Riza hesitated. It has to be something fundamental to our existence, something that can't be untangled from humanity itself. Kovacs exhaled. Our names aren't enough. No, Riza agreed, but our stories might be. Voss understood instantly. We need to make ourselves a narrative, something so deeply human that this thing can't remove it without breaking its hold on reality. Monroe nodded, eyes lighting with realization. We're social creatures. We define ourselves by the past, by our experiences. If we weave our identities into a story, one that spreads, one that's told, then it becomes real. Ward didn't hesitate. She grabbed her console and opened a log entry. We start now. Record everything. Speak it. Write it. Share it. She turned to Monroe. Broadcast it on every frequency. But there's no signal out here, Monroe said. That doesn't matter, Voss said. We do it anyway. As Monroe initiated the transmission, the whispering in their minds screamed. The entity felt it, and it did not like being defied. The battle for existence had begun. The broadcast echoed across the Pioneer, a chorus of voices reciting their stories, their names, their identities. Each word was a declaration of their existence, each sentence an anchor in the shifting sea of oblivion. The crew spoke as one. Memories, hopes, desires, every personal detail woven into a collective narrative that would refuse to be untangled. But as they did, the pressure in the air thickened, almost palpable. The whispering returned, louder this time, a cacophony of alien thought that surged against their minds. Voss could feel it clawing at his skull, a sensation like 1,000 fingers trying to pry apart his memories. You cannot resist. The voice was clearer now, almost tangible in its presence, like the very walls of the ship were speaking. You are but fleeting. You will not survive. Voss gritted his teeth. We will survive. Commander Ward's voice cracked as she spoke into the comm. All crew, keep recording. Don't stop. Write it down. Say it out loud. Our stories are our weapons. But despite their defiance, something shifted in the atmosphere. The lights flickered once again. But this time, it wasn't just electrical interference. It was as if the ship itself was being pulled apart at the edges, as though reality were unraveling. Riza looked up, his face pale. It's not just erasing us anymore. It's attacking the fabric of the ship. His hands trembled as he worked the controls. The systems, they're destabilizing. Something is feeding on the power. It's redirecting our energy. Monroe looked to Voss. Captain, we can't keep this up forever. The ship's power cord is starting to fail. It's like something is draining the energy. Voss's pulse quickened. How much time do we have? I can't say. The core's self-sustaining, but it's not infinite. If we don't get out of this, we'll be stranded in the dark. The thought was enough to shake even Voss's resolve. They were already in the dark, isolated in a place where nothing made sense, where the very laws of nature were being rewritten. The silent horizon was a black hole of existence, a force that consumed not just matter, but reality itself. Then, without warning, the walls of the bridge began to warp. It wasn't the viewports. Those were still clear. But the structure itself, the metal, the bulkheads, seemed to shimmer, bending as if the very concept of the Pioneer was being altered. Kovacs stumbled backward, his voice barely a whisper. This is not possible. It's like the ship is being stretched into a new form. Voss stood tall, fighting the urge to let panic creep in. He couldn't afford to show fear. Not now. Not with the crew depending on him. Ward, get to engineering, Voss ordered. We need to stabilize the core. Monroe, keep broadcasting. Kovacs, Riza, help me with the structural integrity. The crew split, each member working at their stations, pushing back against an unseen force that sought to pull them into oblivion. But for every action they took, the ship's systems seemed to fight back, worse than before, as if the Pioneer itself were resisting their existence. And the whispering, it intensified. You will never leave. Voss knew then that the silent horizon was more than just a place. It was a force, an entity that existed to swallow all that came near. It wasn't just a vast emptiness. It was a predator, and they were the prey. But they would not surrender. They would not be erased. Keep fighting, Voss roared. We are humanity. We do not yield. The ship groaned again, this time a low, resonant hum that vibrated through the very bones of the Pioneer. It was the sound of something ancient and vast, something that had seen countless civilizations rise and fall. Voss could feel it now, in the marrow of his bones. The silent horizon wasn't just a cosmic void. It was a consciousness. And it was hungry. As the crew scrambled to stabilize the ship's systems, the boundaries between reality and nightmare began to blur. The walls around them rippled, like the surface of water disturbed by unseen hands. Voss's vision wavered, each blink bringing with it an almost imperceptible shift in the layout of the bridge. A console was suddenly missing. A doorway that had been on the left was now to the right. Captain, Kovacs shouted, voice cracking with panic. The ship, it's warping. Systems are completely failing. It's like everything's being pulled apart. Voss gritted his teeth, his fingers digging into the command rail. Focus, Kovacs. We need to anchor this ship in something real. Not just data, not just memories. Something that can't be erased. But just as Voss spoke, the lights flickered violently, and the whispering grew to a deafening crescendo. His mind screamed to block it out. But the words, the thoughts, forced their way through. You cannot leave. You are not real. You are but dust in the void. The voice wrapped around his mind like a physical presence, clawing, tearing, trying to pry away his very sense of self. The crew stumbled, each one visibly struggling to maintain their grip on reality. Riza's hands were shaking as he tried to manipulate the data flowing through his station, but the screen in front of him twisted into shapes that defied logic. The air felt heavy, as if something massive was pressing against the hull, squeezing the life out of the ship. The whole structure seemed to shudder under the strain, and Voss could see it now, through the viewport, the horizon. It wasn't just darkness, it was alive. It was a moving, undulating mass, shifting and pulsing, as though it were a living organism that was stretching toward them, hungry. Monroe let out a strangled cry. Captain, something's wrong with me. She staggered back, clutching at her head, her face contorting with agony. Voss rushed to her side, trying to steady her. Monroe, what's happening? I can't remember, she gasped. I can't remember what I was doing, who I was. Her eyes flickered, and for a brief moment, her expression shifted from terror to something like recognition, before it faded, replaced by confusion. Voss's blood ran cold. This was it. The thing was undoing them again. Ward was at his side in an instant, her own voice strained. Captain, if we don't get this under control, we'll be gone. All of us. This thing is erasing more than just data now. It's erasing people. Kovacs stumbled to the center of the bridge, pointing to the main console. We're being torn apart from the inside. The quantum core is destabilizing. I can't stop it. It's like—" his voice trembled. "It's like the ship is becoming part of it. Like we're merging with whatever is out there." The truth hit Voss like a fist. The silent horizon wasn't just a place. It was a force that didn't just consume things. It redefined what could be. And now it was rewriting them. The crew, the Pioneer, everything they had been. All of it was being absorbed into its vast, unknowable void. Voss clenched his jaw. "Then we redefine it back. We anchor ourselves." But even as he spoke, he felt the pull, his identity, his memories, slipping, as if something was trying to unmake him. He fought back. "Monroe," he shouted, "keep telling your story. Tell it louder." With shaking hands, she grabbed the comms, her voice breaking. "I am Monroe. I am part of this crew. I am human." Voss's voice joined hers, stronger. "We are humanity. We do not yield." The whispering roared, the entity pushing back with all its might. But Voss knew something now, something the silent horizon had never understood. Humanity's strength didn't lie in the void of space or in the cold precision of technology. It lay in the stories they told, in the bonds they forged. And those could never be erased. The struggle in the heart of the Pioneer was reaching its breaking point. The ship groaned again, a sound of deep protest, as though it were tearing itself apart. But through it all, one thing remained clear. Humanity was fighting back. Monroe's voice echoed through the ship, her words repeated over and over in a cycle of defiance. "I am Monroe. I am a part of this crew. I am human." It wasn't just her voice anymore. Everyone had joined in. The crew, their voices raised in unison, recited their stories, their names, their histories, louder than the whispers that clawed at their minds. But the silent horizon was relentless. The air seemed to grow colder, denser as the entity squeezed them, tried to suffocate their very being. Voss could feel it, feel his thoughts slipping away, like pieces of sand falling through his fingers. His vision blurred as the walls around them continued to warp, twist into shapes that defied physics, that didn't belong. And then the voice came again, louder, more insistent, as if the very concept of the Pioneer was being drowned in its roar. "You are nothing. You do not belong. You will be undone." Voss's heart pounded in his chest. His body trembled under the weight of that voice, but his resolve remained. He had learned something in these last moments, something profound, something that made his blood burn with defiance. Humanity was not just a species. It was a story that could never be erased. "I will not be undone," Voss whispered, his voice hoarse but unwavering. "I refuse." The others repeated it. "We refuse." They all spoke in unison. The Pioneer groaned again, but this time, it was a sound of resistance, not destruction. The systems flickered, the lights pulsed in time with their chanting. The ship felt it. It was alive, fighting back with the same ferocity they had shown in the face of the horizon's pressure. But there was one final push, the last, most dangerous part of the entity's plan. Voss saw it happening before his eyes. The Pioneer's core, the heart of their ship, was beginning to collapse, destabilizing as it fed off their energy. The walls of reality themselves were threatening to crumble. If they didn't act now, the silent horizon would win. Voss ran to the main console, grabbing the last functioning power readout. "Kovacs, Riza, can we isolate the core from the entity's influence?" Kovacs looked up, sweat dripping from his brow. "We can try, but it's like we're losing control of the core's own systems. The energy isn't just draining. It's being redirected into something alien." Riza turned to Voss, his expression fierce. "There's one last thing we can do. We need to flood the system with data. Too much data. If we overload the core with human input, human essence, memories, stories, emotions, it'll become too much for the horizon to rewrite." Voss's mind raced. It was a gamble, an impossible one. but they didn't have any other choice. Do it. Monroe stood firm, her eyes burning with determination. We'll flood the ship. We'll give it everything we have. They moved as one, every crew member pouring every ounce of their identity, their experiences, their humanity into the ship's systems. Every last name, every last memory, every last story was broadcasted, recorded and stored until the ship was bursting with them. And the entity, for the first time, faltered. The walls of reality trembled, then began to fracture. The whispers turned into screams as the silent horizon recoiled in the face of an onslaught it could not comprehend. It was too much humanity. The horizon couldn't erase them now, because the story had become too strong to erase. The pulse of the ship, of life itself, exploded outward. And then there was silence. For a moment, Voss didn't know if they had won. But then the stars outside the viewport flickered back into view, their light shining bright and clear. The silent horizon was gone. The crew stood in the aftermath, exhausted, battered, but alive. The Pioneer was intact. They had made it. "We're still here," Monroe whispered, her voice barely a breath. "We made it." Voss turned to the crew, a proud smile spreading across his face. Humanity will never be erased. They had faced the void, and they had won.